So my name is Emily Reiss. I work in the career office on Troy University's campus, and with me I have Lauren Cole, who's our director. And today we're just going to walk through a resume, specifically how to show your athletic skills on your resume. So I'm going to go through this quickly so we can try to make it through everything. Just to get us started, thinking first about what is a resume. So it's really a summary of your experiences and skills that are relevant to the job or position that you're applying for. A lot of people get stressed out or concerned that they need to include everything that they've ever done on their resume, and you're just not going to have enough room for that. So you're really trying to pick out key highlights and things that you would like to showcase to an employer. So the purpose of a resume is really to get an interview, right? So it's to serve as that first impression, to show the employer the skills that you have and motivate them to want to bring you in for an interview to learn a little bit more about you. So most employers are only going to spend 30 seconds when they're scanning your resume. And I know that can sound kind of crazy because you're going to put a lot of effort and time into your resume, but they're going to receive so many at one time. They're just going to quickly scan through it to see if it's consistent, if they can find the skills and information that they need. So typically you're only going to want to keep your resume to one page, especially as you're just coming out of college and don't have a lot of work experience at this point. And that makes it really easy for them to scan through to see if you have some of the skills that they're looking for. So there's two steps when it comes to preparation for preparing your resume. The first one is to know yourself. And so ask yourself some questions like, how can I target my resume to each company that I'm applying for? Sometimes this means that you'll have to have a different resume for every job that you're applying for, or at least every industry, because you'll want to promote yourself and your skills a little bit differently depending on which job you're applying for. So you'll want to take an inventory of relevant skills, accomplishments, your education, goals, and experience, and how that will relate to each position. The second part of preparation is going to be knowing those positions. So you're really going to want to do your research on your field and the specific company that you're applying for. So tailor it for that position. What are those companies' mission statements and values, and how can you show that you would be a great fit for that company? So think about the necessary skills that you need for that field. What are some of the qualifications that they're asking for? What education and work experience is required? And what are some of those job duties listed in the job description? And that way you can make sure that you're using some of those keywords from your field on your resume. So there's several types of resumes. The one that we're going to talk about today is the reverse chronological format. And that's because it's usually the most standard resume and the one that's preferred by employers, especially for young students just coming out of college who still need a couple years to gain some work experience. So it's going to be date oriented. You'll notice it's called reverse chronological. So we're going to start with most recent to least recent. And it's really just going to highlight your education, your work experiences, and opportunities that you've had. We'll kind of go through some of the basics of resumes. So again, you've got 30 seconds. You're going to want to keep it pretty short and pretty consistent. So make sure that your resume looks the same and your eyes flow down the page as you're reading it. You'll want to use a uniform font type, font size, and margin setting. So usually we're going to recommend a Times New Roman or an Arial. Keep it around 10 to 12 point font size, and then maybe about 0.7 to 1 inch margins, just something consistent all the way around. I know it's really tempting to utilize templates, but we're going to suggest that you do not do that for a couple different reasons. One, they're hard to edit, so it might have a section on there that you really didn't want to list or that you don't have information to include, and sometimes it can be hard to remove those sections. Sometimes templates are not able to be read as easily by the software that reviews resumes before it actually goes to human eyes. And then sometimes they're going to include just different font colors or templates that you may not be interested in. So we want to try to avoid color on a resume. It sounds boring, but we just want to keep it pretty standard, black and white, no pictures of yourself, no clip art, nothing like that. You don't even need full sentences on your resume. You really just want to use bullet points with action verbs to describe your work experience. And then if you happen to print your resume and give it to someone, just do it on either like regular printer paper, or if you can get your hands on some resume paper, that's usually the best, just because it's a little bit thicker and it has a different color to it, and it can really stand out when you're giving that to someone. So some of the resume sections that we're going to go through today is your header information, your education, work experience, your athletic experience, extra activities that you've been in, and then honors and awards. Now, this isn't mandatory the exact way that you have to list everything. There's a few other sections that you may want to include as well. It really depends on your industry and your experience. So when you start with your heading, this should be the very first thing on the page. Your name should actually be the largest and the boldest thing on the page, so that way it stands out and they know whose resume that they're reading. Besides your name, other information that you're going to want to include your city and your state, a good telephone number, and an email address. You don't necessarily have to list your physical apartment or house complex number because you're usually applying for jobs online. And so you just want to be careful about what kind of information you're putting out for everybody to see. So just your city and state and general area is going to be most important. And then for your email address, make sure that you're keeping it professional. I typically suggest using either your campus email address or maybe a professional first.lastname@gmail.com. We've seen some really crazy email addresses come through our office, and so that can be a major turnoff for employers. So just make sure you have a professional email that you actually check on your resume. So an example of what that would look like at the top of the page is here, your name, and then just those 3 basic pieces of contact information. You can include a line after that if you'd like to, just to add some separation before we jump into the rest of your resume. So the next section is going to be education. And so here you're going to want to start with the highest level of education that you're either currently working towards or have completed. You want to list things like your major, a minor, or a concentration if that's applicable. And then if your GPA is a 3.0 or higher, we're also going to suggest that you list that as well. If it's not, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean that you won't get hired. It's just you've got 30 seconds to make that great first impression. So we're trying to make everything and kind of promote yourself in a positive light at the very beginning. Usually on your resume, especially as you get into junior and senior year of college, you're not going to need to list any high school information anymore, because employers really want to know what have you been doing for the past 4 years or so, not necessarily what did you do 8 years ago when you were a freshman in high school. So when it comes to your education section, you'll want to list things like your degree, your expected graduation date, your school location, and then possibly that minor or GPA if that applies. So you don't need to list things like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, because as you know, and especially as athletes, that's kind of fluid, right? You could end up being a junior or a senior for several years, and an employer really just wants to know when will you graduate or when could you be able to start working for them. You also want to include your official degree title. So it's usually going to be a Bachelor of Science or a Bachelor of Arts in something. So you may need to ask your institution or your advisor what that would be to include on your resume. So you'll see you've got your header information. Very next thing would be all of this that we just talked about for education. And then we're going to go ahead and move on to work experience. Now, I know sometimes as athletes, it's hard to have opportunities for employment experience. So if you don't have anything for this section, that's okay. I'm going to give you a couple other ideas of things that you might can include from your athletic experience. But if you've ever had an internship or a summer part-time job or something that you want to list, this is a good place to be able to do that. So think about opportunities that relate to your job, job that you're applying for, or that you can just pull out what we call transferable skills and apply that to your field. So I know a lot of times as students will have jobs in like some sort of retail or fast food industry. And those are still really good things to list. We just might not want to list specifically what you did, like making the French fries or putting together the hamburgers. We're thinking about those skills that can transfer out into a different field. And so I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. Let's see. So when you're writing your education experience, you're going to want to list things like the company name and location, your job title, your dates of employment, and the duties that you performed. Remember, we're going to list all of this in reverse chronological order. So that means most recent to least recent. And then we talked about not using paragraphs. We're going to use bullet points with action phrases. So you can actually Google action words for resumes and you'll see lots of lists come up, and you'll just want to use your industry and that job description to pick out those action words that are going to work best for your resume. So you'll see an example here on the screen. I've got an internship opportunity, and then maybe you were a cashier at a local fast food restaurant. And so instead of saying, what maybe you actually did or what some of your duties were, we want to think broader about that. So maybe provided a friendly and customer-oriented dining experience, train new staff members on restaurant policies and procedures, handled cash checks and credit card transactions with accuracy. And so those are things that could be helpful in a professional setting as well. So now we'll talk about your athletic experience. Again, this is probably what you've devoted most of your time to over the past several years. So we really want to be sure to highlight that. One thing we've noticed when working with employers is they really do like to hire student athletes for a lot of reasons. One, because they understand that you have a lot of teamwork skills and that can be really useful in a company, and also just the time commitment that goes into it. So if you can complete being a student athlete and maintain good grades and complete your college degree, that's just going to carry over a lot of weight into the workplace. So in this section, you're going to want to include things like your sport, the years that you've played that sport, any accomplishments that you or your team have had, the time devoted each week to training, and then any type of honors and awards. If you've received a scholarship, you can list that in this area as well. And then you're basically going to want to treat it like a job because that's what it's been for you. So again, use those action words to explain what you've done. So I'll show you an example here. I've got a soccer player who received a full athletic scholarship, was the team captain, named Sunbelt Player of the Year, and then we just kind of guessed on a couple things that you may want to list, and this will depend on your sport and your role. Devoted 20 hours a week to athletics while maintaining a full course load, developed concentration, a strong work ethic, and perseverance to meet personal and team goals, gained valuable team building and leadership skills from communicating with 23 team members on a daily basis. And so you just kind of want to highlight whatever skills you think are going to be relevant from your athletic experience to the job that you're applying for. Another section that you might include would be some activities or leadership positions that you've held. These can be anything from campus organizations to community involvement that you've done. This also could be if you currently serve on your school's SAC committee, or if you're on the Sunbelt SAC. These are things that you can list here as well, still taking that athletic experience that you have, but listing it in a different way and showing some of the other things that you've done through that. Okay, so you see I have it listed here at the bottom, 2 different ways of listing that. So one, if you are a SAC member, just kind of describing what that means on your campus. So maybe you attend weekly or monthly meetings and serve as a liaison between your team and your university, advocate for concerns and interests of student athletes at your school, and then represent your university on the Sunbelt Committee. Or maybe you were in a club that just relates to your major at your school. So talking about the monthly meetings that you participated in, networking with professionals in your field, maybe fundraisers that you've done. Employers like to see quantity on your resume. So that means number based, like how many people, how much money did you raise? Those speak a lot to employers when they're scanning your resume. The last section that we'll talk about is an honor section. And so these can be anything related to your athletic, academic, or work experience. We don't want to double list things on your resume, so just choose the right spot for that. But if you have some specific honors, this can be a really great place to put those. You might want to add a brief explanation or description of awards that just won't be familiar to people outside of your sport or your institution. So down here at the bottom, maybe you've been a part of the Sunbelt's commissioners list or academic honor roll. You can list what semesters and then what you had to do to earn that. Maybe your school has their own chancellors, presidents, deans list. You can list that there as well. And then maybe you've been involved in an honor society on your campus through your major. You can list that as well. So other categories you may want to list, there could be several others. If you have a lot of volunteer experience, you might want a whole separate section. If you have military experience, speak another language, very specific certifications or trainings that relate to your field. So sometimes for like computer science, if you're trained in a program, you can list that there just so that way employers will see that. Here's an example of what we would want your completed resume to look like in a Word document. So again, this isn't a template, it was just a blank Word document that we typed everything into, and you can play around with some of that spacing and bolding just to make everything stand out. And you really want to fill up that page. So whether you have to shrink your font a little bit or expand it, you really want a good solid page whenever you're submitting your resume. References usually don't need to go actually on your resume, and so you don't need to type at the bottom references available upon request. An employer knows that if they want a reference, they'll either call you for one, or usually they'll have you upload a reference document anyway, and then they'll contact those as needed. So when you're choosing your reference, you want to think about professional references rather than personal references. So think about coaches, employers, or professors who know you and your work and can speak to that from a professional standpoint. It's always a good practice to ask your references if they're willing to be a reference for you. One, because if they really aren't comfortable with that, I think you would rather know that than having your future employer know that and someone say, no, I really don't want to be a reference for them. And it's just asking permission to give out their telephone number, their email address, and making sure that you're providing the correct one. So maybe it's their work number over their cell phone number that you have because they're a personal contact. It's also a good thing to make sure that your references have a copy of your resume, just so that way they could pull that up if someone does call and they can just have a quick reference to some of the things that you're promoting about yourself. So you'll want to include the same header from your resume. So again, just your name and that basic contact information. And then we typically suggest about 3 to 5 professional references. And so this is what that could look like for you on a document, maybe your coach, some sort of professor or advisor, and then someone from a job or internship that you've had. Okay. And then just kind of finally, there's a lot of advice for resumes. Everyone kind of has their own opinion on that. Some of this can fluctuate based on your area that you live in and the industry that you're applying for. But overall, we base all of this information on industry standards, talking with employers, and just getting a feel for what they're looking for when they're reviewing a resume. So it's always a great idea to have an extra set of eyes look over your resume. So ask your coach, ask your parents, ask your advisor, and then definitely contact your campus career center for any additional help that you may have. I think she said we have like 1 or 2 minutes. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. If not, hopefully that helped.
I have a quick question. When it comes to GPA, would you recommend putting our cumulative or institution?
It depends. Just list whichever one it is. Is your institutional GPA higher than your cumulative GPA?
Yeah.
Then I think you could list your institutional GPA. Then you might just put institutional GPA and then put what it is. So that way you're not lying, but you're still putting your best foot forward in that way.
Awesome. Thank you.